Okay, so today we're going to be talking about secondary dominants and how to use them. So, first of all, what is a secondary dominant? Well, a dominant chord is typically the 5 chord in a given key. So let's start in the key of C major. In the key of C major, our tonic, or the root of the scale, is C. So our tonic chord, the 1 chord, is C major, or C major 7, C major 9, etc. Now, to find the dominant chord, we go to the 5th note of the scale. So in this case of C, we're going to be on a G note. So the 5th of the C major scale is a G, and that gives you a G major chord, or a G7, and that is your dominant chord, okay, the 5 chord of the key. So I consider this to be the primary dominant in the key of C. There's only one dominant chord in a major scale. Okay, so to create secondary dominant chords, what we do is we basically tonicize other chords of the scale. So for example, the 2nd chord of the C major scale is a D minor. Now, if we want to have a secondary dominant to resolve to this chord, what we do is we find the 5th of D. And you can do this by playing a typical power chord shape, or you could play a full D major scale and go up to the 5th note. So if you do that, you'll find that it's an A note. So we're going to play an A 7th chord, just like the G7. And that's going to resolve to D minor. So right there, that's the secondary dominant in the key of C. This is a 5 chord of the 2 chord. Because in the key of C, we typically don't have an A7, we have an A minor. That would be the 6th chord. But a secondary dominant is going to be a dominant 7th chord. So let's try it with another chord from the key. In the key of C, we have C major, we have D minor, we have E minor, and we have F major. That could be the 4 chord. So say we wanted to have a secondary dominant to the 4 chord, to F major. Here's our F. We find the 5th, which is C. So C7 chord. All right, so that would be the 5 of 4. And you can use these in whichever way you want. You can actually do let's try doing multiple secondary dominants in a row. So for example, let's go to the 6th chord, which is A minor. And say we want to do a secondary dominant to the 6th chord. We're going to do E7, that's the 5 of A minor. And then when we go to A minor, let's turn that into a dominant. And that is a secondary dominant to D, okay? So once we go to D, we could also turn that into a dominant, which is the secondary dominant of G. And then that'll finally resolve you to the tonic of the key, C. So in the key of C major, when you normally have a 3, 6, 2, 5, we can change all those into secondary dominants. Okay, and in that case, you could write them all out as the E7 would be the 5 of 6, the A7 would be the 5 of 2, the D7 would be the 5 of 5, and the G7 would just be the 5. But to make that a little bit easier, we can just call them dominant chords by their number in relation to C, so in their actual number of the scale. So for example, 3 would be E, and I could just write that as an uppercase 3 with a 7 to indicate that I want it to be played as a E7. So this would be 3, 7. This would be 6, 7. This would be 2, 7. And this would be 5, 7. Okay, and you can resolve that to a C major 7 or a C major 9, any of those type of chords. So let's see if we can come up with another chord progression using secondary dominants. This time, I'm going to use some dominant 7th chords with altered tensions. So altered tensions are, for example, sharp 9, flat 9, sharp 11, flat 13. Any one of the extensions of the chord that have been altered, those are called altered tensions. So let's start with C, and I'm going to use some secondary dominants. I'm going to play through a chord progression, and then I'm going to talk about it afterwards. So here we go. Okay, so let's discuss what happened there. I started with the 1 chord, C. Then I went to a B7 sharp 9. Okay, now what happens right here? This is the 5 chord of E minor. And then I went to an E minor 7th. Okay, so that's the 3 chord in the key of C. So it was 1, the 5 of 3, or the 7 dominant, to the 3 chord, and then from there I went to A7. Okay, A7 right there is the 5 of 2, or the 6 dominant. Now after that I went to this chord. Now this right here is a D9. It's acting the same way as a D7. I've just added the 9 on top. So this technically is the 5 of 5, but I'm thinking of it just as a 2 dominant. After that, instead of going directly to G, where that's where it wants to go, it wants to resolve, I changed it back to D minor so that I could do a 2-5. Okay, so I could have just done D7 or D9 straight to G7 and then resolve to C. But you see this a lot where you have the 2 chord as a dominant chord, and then you change it back to minor, and then you go to the 5 chord, back to the 1 chord. Okay, this is a very typical chord progression. You'll see these type of chord progressions in jazz standards all over the place. I would definitely recommend learning some jazz standards to get more familiar with secondary dominants. You'll also see it in a lot of R&B songs, especially some Stevie Wonder tunes. He uses a lot of secondary dominants, a lot of jazz chord progressions. And yeah, so I would check these out. I would try to learn some of these like I said, different jazz tunes, and then see if you can come up with your own chord progressions using secondary dominants. This is kind of just a brief introduction because you can keep on getting crazier with it. You can use tritone substitutions, all kinds of cool stuff. And that's another topic for another video. But I would recommend trying these out, see if you can come up with your own chord progressions, try to learn some jazz standards, and see if you can recognize when they're using secondary dominants. All right, thanks so much for watching the video. If you want to help support the channel, you can check out my Patreon where I have backing tracks, I have a PDF, all kinds of cool stuff. Thanks again.